So I want to ask, like, how do you create that heat? This is a
Hmm.
completely different concept.
I know. This is what I love. This is what I get paid to do. So I believe in emergent strategy. I definitely believe
Mhm.
that small fractal changes can make bigger changes. I think that there's so much. I think people underestimate the power of their voice, and it's what happened with me too. It's like you believe that you're up against where you are up against the big bad wolf, who has seemingly all the power, all the resources, all the things to shut you up, and then enough people come together, and then you have a movement. And I believe part of the heat is critical conversations. I believe part of the heat is public accountability. The reason why I wrote the op-ed was several fold, but a large piece of it was public accountability. You have
Right,
to really challenge people with what they care about. I don't think Stanford cares about Black and brown people, but I do think that Stanford cares about its reputation.
right.
And so the way that I have to get your attention is to challenge your reputation. And so I think that we, in our voices, and people experience this, because I've been seeing a few um, articles to come forth on LinkedIn,
Yeah.
at spaces like Harvard, at spaces like Yale, that have had similar experiences. People are tagging me on, like, you read this, LaWanda, you read this. So I'm like, okay, more of that. Like, I want people to have courageous conversations, and I get it. I know that when I write this in the op-ed, a lot of people, or the silent majority, will have to endure,
Hmm.
or have to choose other places that are less toxic. But I just wonder what we could do with that majority if we were to
Hmm.
really raise some noise about, what truly happens in these ivory towers,
Hmm.
to Black and brown people and marginalized folks.
I think even that perspective, like, I language has such a huge impact. And I know we often hear, the perspective of the minority or the minoritized group, and I think that language somehow in makes us feel like we're still a small number. And
Yeah, we're the global majority.
exactly,
Mhm. Mhm.
when you talk about making those fractal changes, if we start to recognize that we are a majority, I do think that heat can come about. So I appreciate you talking about starting
Mhm.
small and being emergent. And it makes me think of the African slash Nigerian. I hear Nigerian proverb. Sometimes I hear
Yeah.
African proverb, the
Mhm. Mhm.
continent.
Right.
If you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far,
Yeah.
go together.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that has historically, I think, not happened, like people going together, or when they start going together it's immediately like broken down. And so
Mhm.
being able to
Mhm.
stay the course, I think, is really important. And so while
Mhm.
we're talking about like what we can do, what do you think that um, white scholars and professors can do, those that make academia do to make academia supportive and to make it equal? Like, how do
Mhm.
you place
Mhm.
black professionals to instigate those changes?
Mm-hmm. There's a framework that I use. I own a DEI firm, and so we work with a lot of big companies, corporate, academia, tech companies, to help make them more inclusive. And so this question comes up a lot. And so part of the framework that I use, I forget who's the original source. I'll have to quote it, but it's knowing, being, and doing. I think a
Mhm.
lot of people want to jump to doing, and doing without awareness is harmful. We've seen that in the last 2 years post, what I call Fed Up Rising after George Floyd. But
Mhm.
there's the knowing, the being. I think that people have to learn to be. I say this, and I say this ad nauseum, but I believe it. Nobody escapes conditioning and socialization.
Right.
This country is conditioned around anti-blackness. This
Right.
is a heteronormative, cis, white-centered country. So
Right.
the chances are high, if you are white identified, that you have been conditioned to be centered. And I want to invite you to just start very simple of being in spaces where you're not the majority,
Mhm.
being in spaces where you are the minority voice, being in spaces where you are uncomfortable, and just feel what comes up for you and see what
Mhm.
comes up for you, and let that be. Yes, there's several resources. There's, how to be anti-racist. There's white fragility. There's DEI training. There's transformative, much of which we offer at Heal Psychological, shameless plug, and Heal Psychological and consultation services. But part of the work is about being and understanding your conditioning. That's one. If I would say this is a pie chart of what I would advise, I would say I would start with the 50% being, and I would start with the 50% of sitting with the discomfort of relinquishing a level of power for equity.
Mm-hmm.
So, equity is about redistributing power, resources, information, knowledge, tools, finances into a group that has historically been underrepresented. And for a lot of people, that feels threatening. And a lot of people, that feels uncomfortable. And that's the very thing that they are doing to other groups, right?
Right.
Like, what? Right. And so I think that 50% of being and 50% of doing the work to do equity, to center other groups, is a piece of the puzzle, because we are behind. I think this woman out of